Hello, and welcome to the Wine Enthusiast podcast, your serving of wine trends and passionate people beyond the bottle. I'm Lauren Buzzio, the managing editor here at Wine Enthusiast, and in this episode, the second in our four-part series featuring interviews with this year's 40 Under 40 Tastemakers of 2020, we're venturing into the world of craft beer. Beer editor John Holl connects with Ashleigh Carter, co-owner and head brewer at Bierstadt Lagerhaus, and Marcus Baskerville, co-owner and head brewer at Weathered Souls Brewing Co, to talk about the shifting American craft beer landscape. From changing dynamics in education and inclusion to trends in stylistic preference and consumption, there's no doubt this beverage space is still learning, maturing, and evolving to yield better quality result and greater lasting impact.
It's amazing to think, we are 40 or so years into the craft beer movement in America. From the very first microbrewery opening up, we now have about 8,000 breweries or so operating in the country. And we've seen the industry sort of level off a little bit. But I'm curious as to when this year started, when 2020 started, where did you see beer in America going, and what was on the horizon for your brewery? And Ashleigh, how about we start with you?
Yeah. Well, I think like everybody, I had high hopes for 2020. We kind of had a pretty majestic 2019. I don't know. Everybody says this, but like lager is having a moment, I guess. I mean, it's every moment for me, so I always kind of laugh and cringe at that. But it's really like a moment where, the general population, especially the craft beer population, is starting to take it a little bit more seriously. So I really feel like we were on the forefront of that, and kind of responsible in a way for some of the craft beer lager movement for everybody in the country. So I guess that's where we were in 2020, and kind of what I'm hopeful for in the future.
Marcus, for you, when this year started, what did you think was going to be on the horizon for you, or what were you hopeful for?
Yeah, so we were kind of on the up and up at the start of this year. We were starting to host a lot of parties that were bringing in large crowds, dealing with specific releases. Like Ashleigh was saying, we were starting to do a lot of traveling, so I was doing a lot of collaborations at that point. But then the biggest thing that was going to happen this year was CBC, so Craft Brewers Conference. So we were one of the more known breweries in San Antonio. So, we were thinking this was more so going to be kind of our red carpet to the rest of the world type of event. I had been brewing beer, barrel aging stuff for about a year and a half to get ready for CBC.
Right. And the Craft Brewers Conference, just for folks who don't know, is an annual gathering of beer professionals, and it moves from city to city every year. But there's educational seminars, and there's an expo floor where people can go and work with hop brokers to buy hops or buy new equipment or find out the latest and greatest in innovation in beer, as well as it's a pretty big networking event. And San Antonio was on the docket for mid-April of this year. So that got shut down pretty early on in the pandemic.
Yep. So dealing with us, also production-wise, was scaling up. So I just hired a new brewer. Our West Coast IPA, we were brewing about 100 barrels of that a month on a 20-barrel system just to supply the accounts that we had. So it was looking to be a good year until COVID hit, for sure.
And so COVID, I think, let's start there, because that's been, I think, the biggest disruptor in the hospitality industry. I mean, in a generation, 5 generations, 10 generations at least. One of the big things, Ashleigh, for you, is you actually started packaging your beer. And I know for a lot of folks who are listening, they might be surprised that up until this point, your brewery, which is several years old at this point, you hadn't been packaging in the traditional sense.
Yeah, it's not that I'm like morally against packaging. I don't. If you get to know me a little better, you'll find that I have a lot of things that I'm definitely against. But packaging in general is not one of them. But it is, to me, we had this idea. I mean, when you think about some of the breweries in Germany, and we just wanted to be a big, small place, if that makes sense. I want to see all my customers from the roof of my building type place. And I believe in beer on draft. And since we focus on a style that's meant to be drank in quantity, and is very delicate and doesn't have necessarily the shelf life of a bigger stout or even any of many of the ales. It was imperative to really like go hard at the draft market and to make it an experience. Go out and drink with your friends. Like, don't sit at home. Like, go out and enjoy each other's company, learn something about people. This is we wanted to build a gathering place that you could celebrate a birthday or a breakup or a job promotion or any of these things, and do it with a beer that is pretty low in ABV and very delicate and doesn't really take an instruction manual, if you ask me. So we ended up having to put beer in packaging and mobile canning, and I had a pretty vicious Monday actually with mobile canning, and now supplies are getting low. So it's
and mobile canning, I guess, for anybody who isn't familiar, is where a company actually comes with a canning line and connects it to your bright tanks, to your brewing equipment, and then cans it off, as opposed to just having one that is your own, that's stationary in place. Yeah.
Don't forget, it's very expensive too. So there's there also is just not like a lot of profit in canning as well, especially when you don't make a ton of beer. We don't make a ton of beer. We only make lager. It takes a very long time. And we were selling a ton of beer on draft pre-COVID, and now that's just not a possibility anymore. So while we're selling the same amount of beer, the revenues, we're getting revenue, which is good. The margins on it are not great.
And you have a restaurant, but Marcus, in your brewery, Ashleigh, but Marcus, you do as well. You're a brew pub. You serve food. You've obviously seen the impacts of COVID as well, especially in Texas, where you had restrictions and then they were lifted, and then they've been sort of put back on you again, and within the last couple of weeks. How's the COVID ride been for Weathered Souls?
It's definitely been an up and down roller coaster. So like you said, dealing with the state of Texas. So the first run went really well. People especially our local community was really supportive as far as the specialty releases, small batch releases, pushing beer and stuff out. So actually, first one, I actually went and bought 2 new 10-barrel tanks based off of how well things were going. Now, in hindsight, would I have done that now? Probably not. But like I said, things were going good first run. So then we were able to open back up the tap room to about a 50% capacity, and that was going well. And then the governor decided to shut everything back down. Now, the second run, people aren't as receptive. People are getting frustrated, upset, dealing with not being able to go out like they want to and do the things that they want to. So we're not really seeing as much traffic and revenue as we were seeing beforehand. What's been saving us is some of the large releases where we were releasing 4 or 5 different beers at a time, small batch quantities that people tend to be excited about. So that's helped us survive dealing with the food because of the limited capacity of what we were doing before with barbecue. And our chef, being the man that he is, he doesn't like leftover meat. So it hasn't been very lucrative for us in the barbecue run, being curbside. So we've actually stopped doing barbecue and currently only doing like burgers, which the burgers are really good, but that only has.
You say so modestly. Yeah.
Yeah, that only has a certain niche within San Antonio, especially with the amount of restaurants that have the ability to still be open and then serve liquor, beer, and stuff within their restaurants at a 50% capacity. So dealing with this particular run, it hasn't been that great dealing with the second. So it's definitely been a roller coaster with us trying to figure out courses of revenue and how to streamline some funds into the brewery.
And so you have had to be creative, right? I mean, Ashleigh, now that you're able to mobile can your beer and release it, to people, to go now, you're also in a very crowded city with a lot of brewery choices and a lot of beer choices. And you were obviously one of the more popular ones when people would come to your place before this. Are you finding challenges and trying to be creative to get people to at least come to your doorstep to pick up beer to go?
It's difficult, to be honest with you. I mean, it's without, we're down 70%. We are a restaurant. But like Marcus said, like, I mean, keeping food on hand and trying to, I mean, restaurants are awash at their best days, to be honest with you, you know, and they're a reason to keep people, you know, drinking more beer and ordering another one and getting groups. And we did a lot of, like, 30% of our revenue last year was parties, like just straight up like 40-person, 100-person parties. We have a rather large space and we're only allowed to have 50 people inside, even though our place can hold almost 400.
Wow.
So the problem is nobody's coming to Denver. Honestly, we have the mountains.
Right.
I mean, Denver breweries, Denver in general is the sleepiest, sleepy town ever. And it's really hard to get people to come out because there is still the hesitation, you know. Also, you know what people really love when they're drinking, John? They love rules. They love when you give them a lot of rules. They're like, oh, give me some more of those rules that I can drink with. Like, they don't like rules. And because we're in Denver, we're under a lot more scrutiny. You know, the health department and all those things visit us far more frequently than they do in some of the neighborhood and suburban places and up in the small mountain towns. So we're really seeing like a lack of traffic here. I mean, our liquor store sales are going great. You know, liquor stores are up 300%. And it's crazy. We actually did a collaboration beer with Boulevard, which was quite a highlight of my career, to be honest with you. We did it on their
Sure. That's a Kansas City brewery. Yeah. And one of the largest in the country, actually.
Yeah. You know, we did it. We made the beer. We made a Pilsner on their 135 hectoliter brew house. And they actually took the appropriate amount of time to make it. Their normal turnaround on the lagers, 21 to 28 days, I believe. And we actually took the full, like, 10, 11 weeks because they have a lager tank they never use. And so it was cool. We were going to be in a package and all these things. And, you know, we have that beer still left over here, like in cases, but every liquor store sold out in like right away, instantaneously. And it's funny, we still have cases of it and nobody will come here and buy it. So
if I could get on a plane, I would come and buy you out, certainly. But yeah.
Yeah, you know, so that kind of thing is a little bit frustrating when you think about people they're not coming. And we are trying to be creative, but we can't really have live music, right? We can't really, like, we're trying trivia, but to be honest, people are just not that weary of coming out or weary of coming out, rather.
Yeah. So as COVID was happening and continues to, and was really ravaging the hospitality industry, socially, this country started to change after the murder of George Floyd. The resurgence of the Black Lives Matter movement happened. Beer and breweries, especially, as gathering places, as places where people can get together and share thought. Typically, it's passionate people, I think, that gather at breweries. They care about craft. They care about the artisanal nature of beer. They care about free thought and shunning the status quo. I mean, that's what craft beer has been about since its resurgence 40 years ago, is trying to go against just the establishment of big beer. Marcus, you did something that has really sort of galvanized the brewing industry in creating we've used the word collaboration beers a few times now, and I want to get into that a little bit deeper in a moment. You created a beer recipe and put it out to people and challenged them to think about social justice and to think about actually bringing real change to America. Can you tell us about the Black is Beautiful beer program?
Yes. So, like you were saying, dealing with the death of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and the recent protests that were going on, basically, I felt really inclined to do something. Originally, I was going to go ahead, release a beer within the tap room, and donate money, and it was going to be the Black is Beautiful. And then over the course of that weekend, I was having a discussion with Jeffrey Stuffings from Jester King, and he challenged me to turn it into this collaboration. So dealing with the collaboration itself, it's a call originally it was a call to all the breweries in the United States, but it's kind of transcended well past that, being we've hit all 50 states, over 20 countries, and I think we're sitting at over 1,080 breweries now. A lot of people came to arms dealing with the collaboration, and it was a stout recipe, simple American stout recipe, a classic recipe we haven't seen in a long time. dealing with the whole pastry stout craze. And
all right, so I'm gonna stop you just really quick though. So pastry stouts are essentially, you know, big imperial stouts that taste like candy or sugar or pastries. So you can have like cherry pie stouts that actually have cherry pies in them, or at least, you know, unadorned or, you know, big bold flavors, or stouts that taste like bear claws or jelly donuts or etc. An imperial stout recipe, the base one, just what are some of the flavors? If somebody hasn't had one before, how would you describe what that beer tastes like?
Yeah, depending on where you lie with the IBUs, it's a
and that's the bitterness unit. Yeah,
it's a coffee roasted forward stout with a lot of accents of chocolate within the background. About a medium body viscosity to it, and then I would say medium high ABV. Some people call it a high ABV, but our stouts generally lie between 12 and 14%. So 10% for me is a little bit on the lower scale.
And when you're saying coffee and chocolate, there's actually no coffee or chocolate in there. Those are just malt-derived flavors.
Yeah, those are just malt-derived flavors that you get from the black malt and the chocolate malt used within the beer.
So, I mean, just for this audience, for the Wine Enthusiast podcast here, if you do like coffee, if you do like chocolate, you know, this beer will actually speak to you, I think, on a fun level. And it is rather approachable, despite a 10% ABV, which is high for some people. But anyway, I'm sorry. So you put that recipe out there.
Yeah, so we put the recipe out there. Kevin Dyer from KD Designs put a wonderful label showcasing the different hues of black, brown and black within the label. And then we called on these breweries to use this recipe, use this label, and then come out with this beer. And then once this beer is produced, those 100% of those proceeds are then donated to a local charity or foundation entity that supports police brutality reform and legal fees. So again, originally I was thinking that possibly we would maybe get 200, 250 breweries, but you know, we're almost to 1,100. So the response on this has been amazing. And from what I gather, dealing with, you know, the amount of commerce that is being moved from these breweries supporting this social justice initiative, I mean, the brewing industry in itself is currently making history.
And one of the things that sort of popped up, you know, for me, or really sort of piqued my interest in this was the last point of anybody who signs on to make this beer under that name is to remain committed to actually bringing meaningful change to beer, but also to, you know, to their communities. That you didn't design this necessarily to just be a one and done. Correct.
I mean, you know, the inequality and injustice isn't going anywhere anytime soon. So I didn't want this to be something where it was a marketing ploy or, you know, breweries use this just to show that they support. This is something that is for the long haul. You know, there's breweries that are implementing mentorship programs, breweries that are implementing internships. So different people are taking active notice of this in the process of creating a diversity committee for the state of Texas with the Texas Brewers Guild. So people are taking this initiative seriously and noticing that there is a lack within our communities and a lack within even the brewing community within itself. So people are actually trying to identify those issues and make those changes as needed.
Ashleigh, you've also spoken up about this in the past as well. I mean, what are some of the changes that you think need to happen within the overall beer community, and what should consumers be focusing on to also help bring those changes about?
I think it's a difficult, like, hard to distill down into like a very like concise, specific.
Oh, of course.
Okay, so I think if we look at like craft beer, if we like look at the whole thing, at some point it does become slightly snobbish, you know. And I think in that realm, when it becomes slightly snobbish, you start to exclude people. And I have always been of the opinion that instead of like when somebody walks in your tap room, anybody, right? It wouldn't matter what they look like, whatever, to not make a judgment about what you think they would like, wouldn't like, you know, why they're there, etc. And really trying to bring in more people into the fold, because it can be intimidating. It's a very much, you know, white male industry, you know what I mean? And sometimes even as a, you know, a woman, you don't know, you get the, you like fruit beer, you like this, or you like that. They make it very much a judgment about what you do or do not like. And I think it's very important, when you're talking about bringing more people into the fold, initiatives like what Marcus is talking about, and just starting from everybody's tap room in general, from your staff, like stop judging or stop trying to read people or stop trying to figure out what they like based upon how they look, and start, bringing everybody together, and giving them and showing them the full range of craft beer, and showing them that you don't have to be embarrassed if you like something specific or don't like something, or and don't talk down to people that maybe are new to the scene, and I think that when we talk about a lot of like disenfranchised groups and things of that nature, we often tend to assume they don't know anything about it, or make a judgment call about what they would or wouldn't like, and instead of making them feel bad for that, or not welcoming them in there, it's a way that we can really build a more diverse, bigger community of people, as if we just open up something as awesome as beer, right? It's what we do is not anything amazing. What we do is bring people together, and I think that if we just continue to try and do that, maybe we can diversify this and be at the forefront, and having Marcus and myself and more female and black and brown people and in front of as in the forefront of beer drinking, that it normalizes it, which I think it hasn't been for a while normalized.
What's interesting is that I know imperial stouts can be daunting for some people who are not accustomed to drinking beer. It's a complaint or even a phobia that I hear from folks all the time of like, oh, I don't like dark beer because they think it's going to be too strong or too aggressive. And I think in most cases, if you hand them a properly made one, like what you make, Marcus, that can go away very, very quickly. But Ashleigh, you're making lagers, and true to style, German lagers, and lager is the by far the most popular beer category, beer style in the world. Do you find that because you make beers that people are aware of, even if they're not necessarily beer drinkers, that you can get people to come to the door for the first time to have a half liter?
Lager's on a 150-year winning streak. I'll say it again and again. We compete with the big guys a little bit, but sometimes that's hard because they don't look at us as necessarily quote unquote craft enough. It needs to like be crazy or be whatever in order to be considered like craft. It needs to be, handmade, even though it's just me and one other person, like we make all the beer, but for us, trying to make as clean, as bright, as true to style beer is something that I think we can bring more people into the quote unquote craft fold. And it doesn't have to be a ubiquitous yellow liquid, but also at the same time, if you want to come here and just think about it as that's perfectly okay too. I think it's a way we can bring a more these group of people that never thought that maybe they'd ever like craft beer because either they've been introduced to it in weird ways, or it's too hoppy, or it's too this. Like, again, our beer doesn't necessarily need an instruction manual. It's something you're familiar with and something you're comfortable with because you know it. Either your dad drank it, or your mom drank it, or you drank bathtubs of Busch Light when you were in college, like me. And it's something that you can maybe understand, and it doesn't have to be just this bland yellow liquid.
So the Black is Beautiful beer is starting to pop up around the country right now, and I think anybody who has a local brewery, and the majority of us living in America right now do, check the tap list and go see if you can pick some up, and know that you're supporting an excellent cause when you are when you're buying this. But you both have mentioned collaboration beers at this point, and one of the things that I've always enjoyed about covering the beer industry is seeing when two breweries with either similar or different backgrounds or philosophies get together to make one beer together, and it's usually a one-off. I'm curious as to how you select how you're going to make a collaboration beer, who you prefer to work with as far as breweries, and what you see as the benefit to you professionally, but then to also us as the consumers of making collaboration beers? And Marcus, you've been on a bit of a tear recently with some of these, and you had some planned that got scuttled for last spring. But what's the appeal for collaboration beers?
Yeah, for me, the collaboration beers are kind of a learning process. So for me, I like bringing in like-minded individuals. Most of the time, we're producing stouts or IPAs, some of our more popular styles that we do. But it's more so kind of learning what their processes are, learning what our processes are to kind of complement the beers that we're already doing. Also, dealing with the type of beers that we produce, you have that whole quote unquote hype aspect to it. So we tend to collaborate with other breweries that have kind of the same popularity and stuff like that. Dealing with San Antonio specifically, San Antonio is pretty still new to the craft beer scene. Even with the amount of breweries that we have. We only have, I think, 16 breweries in the entire city, and we're in the 7th largest city in the United States. So I like to try to bring in some of these collaborations of breweries and then also the fact that our distribution is horrible here. So getting your beer into Texas is really difficult. TABC does not make things the easiest for other individuals, especially outside of the state. So my whole thing is bringing in some of these breweries that our city would never otherwise see. And then on the other spectrum, we've done collaborations with breweries where I've wanted to learn processes that I'm not necessarily familiar with. And then in exchange, we teach them processes that they're not specifically familiar with to kind of, spread the love and share information.
In the way that Marcus is focusing on IPAs and stouts, Ashleigh, when you and your brewing partner Bill I are doing collaborations for Bierstadt, you're living largely in the lager family, aren't you?
Yeah, I'm a little different. I keep a lot of things pretty close to me. I only do a collaboration since just the way our brew house is set up, we don't actually have a lot of space for experimental, for single one-off beers. It is, the business model from the start was to make an ocean of pale lager and, get to experiment once in a while. And to me, a collaboration has to be scheduled, I don't know, months and months in advance. I had like 4 different collaborations this year. I have to know the person. I have to trust. I have to have had their beers and, feel like they're quality. I have to know, do they have the same ethos as I do when it comes to beer, when it comes to, social things. It's very important to me. I keep it very close just because I don't have a lot of space to do a lot of collaborations. Also in the lager realm, we just don't have necessarily the variety. There is quite a bit of variety, and I have done some interesting collaborations that you wouldn't necessarily expect from our brewery, being as traditional as we are. But it's really important for me to learn about lager yeast. And I think that by pushing the envelope on some of these things, and by pushing the envelope, I definitely mean nothing crazy. But for me, learning about lager yeast and learning about it with different, malts and different alcohol contents and with different, hopping and how lager yeast can really perform in a variety of scenarios, a little warmer, a little colder. I'm very much focused on one thing. So whenever I do a collaboration, especially at my place, there are 2 rules. It has to be a lager and it's going to be bright. No, nothing hazy. We're going to filter the shit out of it. It's going to be perfectly, I'm going to filter it. So those are the 2 rules when we do a collaboration here, because it does take so long. And that beer, I may only get to do 6 different seasonals / collaborations per year. If I'm lucky. So I'm very much more hold my cards close, find the right person, dance around a little bit, and then make a beer together.
Need a break from the news? We're very excited to tell you about an all-new podcast from our partner site, Thirsty Nest, the first wine and spirits registry for the modern couple. This podcast is called Can I Buy You a Drink? And on it, founder Jackie Strum will interview wine and wedding industry up-and-comers about their very own meet-cute stories and their path to finding the one. It's a dreamy break from all the scary headlines that will warm your cold, cold heart. So check out Can I Buy You a Drink from the Thirsty Nest team on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or any other podcast platform you prefer.
I always feel really fortunate when Lauren Buzzio lets me sit in the interview chair for the Wine Enthusiast podcast, because I get to interact with a different audience. I've been covering beer for 20 years. I've obviously interviewed the two of you several times, and either hung out at Ashleigh's brewery quite a bit in the past. But I'm very much immersed in the beer world, and having now worked at Wine Enthusiast now for the last couple of months, I've been introduced to a whole new category of drinking, and a whole new fan base and passion base as well. And I'm learning stuff all the time about wine, and I love that we're able to sort of teach people about beer. My last question to the two of you is, what do you think is largely misunderstood about beer, and how can people fix that, or how can people sort of come to a better understanding? And Marcus, I'll throw it to you.
Yeah, I would think the biggest misconception is you always hear that, well, I don't like beer. And it's mostly because they've had, one of the bigger beer brands. But we know that when you start diving in further deep into the craft beer realm, that there's an array of styles, flavor profiles, and different beers for everybody, right? So you might not be a lager fan, but you might be a stout fan, or reverse, or IPA fan. A lambic fan. There's all these different styles within realms that produce off these different flavor profiles for different palates. And I think people just need to get more versed within what they enjoy within their own flavor profile, and seek out beers within that, versus letting people introduce them to beers that they generally like. Especially like us speaking within the wine realm, people generally stick to certain flavor profiles that they like. And so that can translate very much within the beer realm, right? It's just a matter of finding that particular style that you're going to enjoy, and that's going to dive you into the right direction. And I'll give you an example. For me, when I first got into beers, I was more of a Hefeweizen and brown ale fan. You couldn't get me to drink a stout.
Those are two very different styles, but yeah,
yes.
That's fine. Yeah.
But just generally, as far as the flavor profiles of what I enjoyed within beer, that's generally the two realms of what I enjoyed. You couldn't get me to drink a stout. You couldn't get me to drink IPAs. But then as my palate developed from trying these different beers, those are now my two favorite styles, outside of a very well done Pilsner. So, it's just generally training your palate, training your flavor profile to start getting into other styles that you're generally not going to take to, or don't even know are available to you.
Miss Carter, what's misunderstood about beer?
A lot. But I think I think that in some ways the beer industry has done itself recently a disservice in continuing the misunderstandings of beer. When I compare it to wine, I sometimes think that they take wine more seriously than we take beer. And I'm not saying like me or Marcus or whatever, but like it's not as gimmicky. And I worry that with some of the gimmicks that are happening in the brewing world, putting, tomatoes or gummy bears or whatever it is
Skittles,
into beer,
yeah.
Skittles, that we are doing ourselves a disservice when it comes to beer. It's one thing to try to make something taste like a Reese's peanut butter cup. A winemaker would never do that. Would never just peel 1,000 Reese's peanut butter cups and put it in a bottle of wine. So I worry that we are as a industry doing ourselves a bit of a disservice when we use gimmicks, and don't stick to, why we like beer in the first place, which is, all these interesting flavors, the lower alcohol content on some of these things. Hops are such an amazing, interesting component that we can really, see interesting beers being made with them, or different flavor profiles, or, you know, it can be fruity, it can be dank, it can be all these things. So I think in a little way we're pushing that misunderstanding about beer, but in its best days, beer is, you know, not necessarily as, you know, pinky out. It is, you know, something that can be savored and enjoyed. There are different beers for different occasions, just like there is wine, right? We're talking maybe a something super viscous, super dark, super alcohol heavy, you know, closer to a port that you could drink, you know, at the end of the night. There's also, you know, I think beer and food pairing. Beer is so much more versatile when it comes to food. Have you ever had a double IPA with a big blue cheese? Like, it's amazing.
Yeah. Or a double IPA with a carrot cake. Yeah.
Yeah, or a double IPA with a carrot cake, or with a steak, you know, like these things, the rules are much more able to be bent when it comes to food and beer than when it comes to necessarily wine and food. You know, there aren't rules because we didn't come up with any. So I think, you know, pairing food with beer is an infinitely successful and cool thing. And I think it can bring a lot of people into the fold, you know, when they think about flavors instead of just thinking about, you know, beer, as it were.
Well, the annual Wine Enthusiast 40 Under 40 list is now out. And of those 40 people, the two people representing beer have joined me today. Ashleigh Carter from Bierstadt Lagerhaus and Marcus Baskerville of Weathered Souls. Congratulations to the both of you for being on the list. And thank you so much for taking time with us today to talk about beer and all that you're doing to advance it moving forward.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And I was looking forward, Marcus, to visiting your brewery during CBC. So hopefully one day we'll be able to leave our respective cities. So.
I hope so. I visited yours. I've been to your brewery about 4 or 5 times. It's one of my favorites when I come to Denver.
Oh, I appreciate that.
I think there's probably a collaboration beer that can exist, and just to tie it together with the Wine Enthusiast 40 Under 40, you know, a wine barrel aged lager, perhaps.
You know, I've never put anything in a barrel, right?
First time for everything. 2020 is so weird.
It is.
Thanks again.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Wine Enthusiast podcast. It's clear that the craft beer scene is still a beautiful work in progress, but the future looks bright thanks to passionate, creative, and caring people like Ashleigh, Marcus, and so many others leading the charge for positive change and sustainable momentum despite trying times and shifting consumer and retail habits. You can read more about all of our 40 Under 40 Tastemakers of 2020 online, or by picking up a copy of the October issue, out now. Subscribe to the Wine Enthusiast podcast on iTunes, Google Play, or wherever you find podcasts. And hey, if you like today's episode, we'd love to read your review and hear what you think. And why not tell your wine-loving friends to check us out too? You can also drop us a line at podcast@winemag.com. For more wine reviews, recipes, guides, deep dives, and stories, visit Wine Enthusiast online at winemag.com and connect with us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at Wine Enthusiast. The Wine Enthusiast podcast is produced by Lauren Buzzio and Jenny Grossa. Until next episode, cheers.